Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk ABM with me, Declan Mulkeen, CMO of account-based marketing agency Strategic ABM. ABM is one of the hottest B2B strategies right now, helping companies to win, grow and retain their most important accounts. This podcast allows me to spend some time talking to account-based marketing leaders about their ABM programs and share their insights with other B2B marketers, wherever you are on your ABM journey. So today I'm joined by Karla Rivershaw, who's the head of marketing of Turtl. Karla, thank you for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about Turtl and perhaps something that maybe people don't know about your company.
Sure. So Turtl is we actually struggle to know exactly how to define turtle because I don't think there is a category that it exactly fits into. We're kind of like a new dimension, I suppose. But basically, we are a platform for creating content that will help you to get read, essentially. So we are really interested in making sure that the content that people produce is actually being read as opposed to just being out there in the world and then who knows what happens to it afterwards. So in terms of what people might not know about Turtl, I think it's probably fairly well known because we do talk about it, but it's probably the thing I think is most interesting about Turtl is the fact that it's very much founded on the some principles of psychology. And I know that this is something that we'll probably talk about a little bit later, but we're really interested in how the brain works and how the brain interacts with content that it comes across and how it absorbs information, retains information, how it persists with content that you're reading. And so when you produce a piece of content in Turtl, we take into account all of those psychological principles to ensure that the content you produce is the most engaging piece of content possible.
Okay, well, let's talk on a little bit more about that a little bit later on in the conversation. But just because of who we were talking earlier about the times we're living in, but obviously we're living through some rather extraordinary times at the moment. What have you learned over the course of the last few weeks?
I think what it has certainly helped me to do is to really focus in on I guess the most important things and the most important messages, because prior to this, particularly when you work for a small company, you have like 1,000 ideas of things you want to do and you spend like a few minutes over here before you realize actually we need to go over there and do that. And that's fine. But actually with the COVID-19 situation, it's really helped us to focus on what are the key things that are going to resonate most with people right now? What are the key challenges that people are experiencing that we can help them to overcome? And so really, really thinking about that sort of, I guess that kind of customer obsession piece about, what is it that our customers need right now and how can we help them achieve that? So I think that's been quite a useful exercise for us. It's obviously really helped to kind of cut down a lot of the fat. So we're, placing all of our energy into producing content, for instance, which really helps to meet those needs. And I think that the quality of the content we've produced has been some of the best we've ever done. So it's been quite an interesting exercise for sure.
And talking about content, how's Turtl's marketing strategy changed over the course of the last 4-8 weeks?
I think in terms of our strategy, it's really been around, first of all, thinking about those messages. What are the messages that are going to help resonate with our audience? And then really gearing the whole company behind those messages. So making sure we're developing the right content to support that messaging. And then basically training the whole company on that messaging. So we've produced a series of playbooks, which we actually launched this week or last week to our company, where everybody basically has exactly the same information in terms of what Turtl is, how it's going to help to support people, what are kind of the messages that they need to be using when they're having conversations, producing like a pitch deck that they all use. So everybody's speaking off the same hymn sheet. And yeah, I think it's been really, really good for us just to make sure that regardless of who you're speaking to, what part of the business they're in, what channel they're using to have that communication, that it's all really, really consistent. So I think just being really, really clear on who we are, what we're doing, and how we're going to help people at this time. Yeah, it's been great. So I think that's probably where we've been focusing most of our efforts over the last few weeks.
And in terms of your clients, and obviously the conversation that you've had with your clients, have you seen their attitudes change in light of everyone's working from home? You're sitting there at home, I'm sitting here at home. Have you seen any changes with your clients and how they're talking to you about using your services?
I mean, I think that the general feeling is, well, gosh, we had a lot of plans around using events, for instance, as a means for us to generate pipeline for the business, and suddenly that's been taken away. So obviously a lot of people have moved towards using things like webinars, for instance, as a kind of replacement for live events, but actually a lot of businesses are thinking more broadly than that. They're not looking to kind of replace like for like. They're actually thinking, well, how can we start to enhance our digital strategy so that we're able to reach people in different ways? And so the conversations that we've been having with people have been around how can we make sure that the content we're putting out there is being read? How can we measure the performance of the content? Because a lot of businesses haven't been doing that. They've been still publishing in, say, old formats like PDF, and they have no idea how people are engaging with their content. So that's something they want to rectify. And also they want to gear up their sales team as well so that they are putting out content which is personalized, for instance. So, at this time where salespeople aren't able to get in front of people face to face, how can they create new experiences for those customers where they're able to sort of build these personal relationships without being, in front of them? And so content is a really good way of doing that. So I think overall the response we've been receiving from prospects and customers has been extremely positive. And, I've heard people say to me, gosh, Turtl has come in at exactly the right time. We need it now. And I mean, that's obviously music to any marketer's ears to hear stuff like that.
So you touched on it earlier, actually, around the psychology and how we read and how we consume content.
Yes.
Would you mind expanding on that a little bit more?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess the kind of the foundations that we have in psychology started, I don't know, quite a number of years ago now, when our CEO and founder, Nick Mason, was working on a project at the University of Oxford. And he happened to be in the same room as a bunch of researchers who were discussing some research that they were working on. And as part of this conversation, he came across this study that they referenced, which was talking about content, offline and online content, and how the brain engages with that content. And basically, there was this study that was done where people were asked whether they preferred the offline experience or online experience of reading content more. And generally, people would say, I prefer reading offline more than I enjoy reading online. And so they did some analysis of brain activity to see what's actually going on there when people read. And the interesting thing was that regardless of whether people were reading offline or online, the brain was exactly the same. So there was no change in terms of brain activity. So this wasn't like a physiological thing. This was a psychological thing. And so it really got him thinking about what could we do to make the online reading experience as engaging as the offline one, because clearly it's not something that can't be overcome. And he thought this could be a real game changer for marketers if they started to apply some of these psychological principles to the content that they're producing. Well, that could make a huge difference in terms of the performance of that content. So some of the things that we've been looking at Turtl are one thing, for instance, is around how the brain interacts with imagery. I mean, imagery is just such a powerful thing. And I think most people know this, that we are hugely visual creatures. I think it's something like 90% of brain activity is, focused on vision. And so we need to make sure that the content that we produce is very visual. And it's one of the really interesting things about imagery is like it's a very visually persuasive medium, which is why, for instance, if you're watching the news, for instance, regardless of what news station you're looking at, they always have a very similar format in terms of how they present their news. They'll have like the big image, they'll have a little bit of text underneath, but it's all about the image because they know, and they've done so much testing over the years to see what kind of formats work and what don't, that having a big image, having a little bit of text is how people will engage for longer. They will remember more information. They'll keep going back to that news channel because that's just how our brain ticks. And there's a load of really fascinating studies around imagery. So making sure that the content you produce in Turtl is very visual is the thing. The second thing is around like the layout of the content. So, if you think about the experience of, say, reading a book, for instance, the physical one, you're turning pages, and even like with the Kindle, they have tried to mirror that experience. You're still turning pages, even though you're not physically doing it, you have to turn a page. And the reason why that is so successful is because we have a limited working memory. So when you're reading, your brain gets filled up really, really quickly. And so that act of actually turning over a page helps to sort of reset partially that working memory so you're able to read for longer. And so if you think about other formats, so for instance, like the PDF, which we're on a mission to kill, it doesn't have that experience for you, because when you're reading a PDF, rather than turning pages, you're scrolling. And as you scroll, your brain switches from being in like an active state to a passive state. And you get what's known as scroll fatigue. So you're scrolling and you're scrolling, and before you know it, you're not actually taking any information in. It's a highly mundane experience, I would say. So that's the kind of like layout. So making sure that you do give your brain that chance to sort of reset a little bit. And then the final thing is about interactivity. So, and that's very much around this like active state versus passive state. So you want to move your brain away from being in a passive state to being a more active state. And the way to do that is through interaction. So again, if you think about reading something like a PDF, it's a very static experience that you're going through. There's no real way to interact with that content other than to scroll down. Whereas if you start to introduce more interactive elements, so if it's like, for instance, a live poll where you can click on it, you have to think about how you want to respond to that poll. You can see the live results pop up, or if you want to, watch a video, or if there's like maybe a little quote that pops out that maybe you want to share on social, it's just, there's lots of different possibilities for you to be able to engage with that content, and it keeps your brain active. It doesn't allow it to switch into the passive mode. And that is so, so important. And there was a study that was done, I think it was maybe 2014, where they actually studied how persuasive content is if it's like a passive experience or a more interactive experience. And like the results were overwhelmingly so that if it's a more interactive piece of content, it's far more likely to be persuasive for the people who are reading it. So when we're producing content in marketing, we have to stop producing such passive content, because it's just not persuading. And I know we had this conversation before, Declan, where we were talking about, downloading that PDF, and it's like a, 72-page white paper, and my heart just sinks when I see that. I just know I'm not going to read it, because it's a really dull experience. It's far too long. It's just not engaging for the brain. So yeah, those are some of the psychological principles. There are more, but all day that we think about when producing content.
No, I think the funny thing, as we're both marketeers, we spend an enormous amount of time creating content, and there's a huge effort, combined effort from many parts of an organization to create that content. And it seems such a shame that content is not really actively used, or it doesn't actually have the end result that you wish it to have with all that time and effort, really. So let's just talk a little bit about ABM and Turtl, and how you see Turtl. I mean, how do you see Turtl helping companies do better ABM?
I mean, I think in the first instance, it's really about the insights that you're able to get out of the tool. So I've talked a lot about, the format, but it's also about what you can get in the back end of the tool as well. And I think number one, when it comes to account-based marketing, you've got to have the insights, because if you don't have that, you don't even really know where to start. Like, one of the first things you need to do is account selection. And how can you possibly select accounts if you don't know a lot about them? And obviously some of that information you get will be through like field work that your sales team can do. But it's also really helpful if you have some, actual data and insights that you can use to drive decisions. So, for instance, what are the kinds of topics that people from this particular account might be interested in? And, how granular can you go there? Like maybe that the people in this particular division are interested in these things, those divisions in something else, or even right the way down to the individual. So you're able to start creating plans for specific people within an account. So I think the insights and intelligence you're able to get off that is huge. And for marketers, I mean, this is it's so valuable, because we struggle so much to be able to show businesses the value that we deliver. I mean, it's like a constant thing that we're constantly battling to show how valuable we can be. And actually, if you're able to deliver this sort of intel to the business and to salespeople and show them, well, look, we know all of this information about your account, or the people that you're prospecting, that is something that will really make a salesperson's eyes light up, because that's stuff that they don't know and they're not able to get on their own. They need a marketer to be able to help them with that. So I think that is really, really interesting from an account-based marketing perspective. And then, of course, there's the whole personalization aspect as well, which I think we will talk about in a little bit. But, personalization is obviously, it's a bit of a buzzword. It's something that people have been talking about for quite a long time now. But I honestly think that it's been something which is sort of like, it's been a tough nut to crack. We've been talking about it a lot, but not really executing on it particularly well, particularly when it comes to content and delivering personalized content at scale. And I think that's something that we've finally figured out at Turtl, and hopefully we'll be able to help account-based marketers to achieve as well.
So let's just continue that thread in terms of personalization. You just touched on a couple of really good points there. One obviously is with like one-to-many programs, very often what you're looking for is personalization, or a small degree of personalization at scale, whether that's a one-to-many or a one-to-few program.
Yes.
And you touched on the fact that Turtl can help.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So one of the really interesting developments with Turtl recently is the ability to be able to deliver personalized content. And basically how this works, just to kind of explain it to you, is, for instance, you may have a piece of content that's, I don't know, it's got different chapters about different topics. And you know that people within a particular account will be interested in certain aspects of that content, not necessarily everything, right? So they might be interested in the first 3 chapters, chapter 8, chapter 11, and chapter 12. So one thing you're able to do is to say, okay, I'm going to be sending this piece of content to that person interested in these things. So you're able to just kind of check a box to say, make sure that we're producing a piece of content that just contains those pieces of information. So you're able to do that. You're able to also fill in a form to with maybe a little bit of key information about that person. So their name is Joe, work in this particular company, and I don't know, which is a part of this particular sector. And what will happen is that this piece of content will automatically get generated specifically for that person, maybe even in their branding. I mean, whatever, the sky's the limit really in terms of how you want to customize this piece of content for that person. And it was just like a click of a button, really. Once that baseline piece of content is produced, you can then slice and dice it however you want. And it's not going to require you to go to a designer every time to produce a bespoke piece of content. I mean, God knows I've been there in the past, and it is time consuming and it is expensive. So now you don't have to do that anymore. You literally click a button and you have a piece of content which you can automatically send out to somebody. And so that, I think, is super exciting from a personalization perspective. And it will be really powerful for those, one-to-one and one-to-few examples.
Yeah. And so one more question around ABM. What use cases have you seen of how your technology has been best implemented at an ABM level?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the personalization stuff is still to come because it is, like I said, really, really brand new for us. So we know, or think we know, how people are going to be using it. But to be honest, we learn so much from our customers all the time. They'll probably start to use it in creative ways that we hadn't even thought about. But certainly other use cases, they have, obviously the insights gathering is really, really important. So producing pieces of content, sending it out to people, using that as a way to then be able to decide what the next piece of content is they should be producing. So if they start to see, let's say they produce a piece of content that they send out to a particular account and, X number of people within that account, then they will be able to see, okay, these people are particularly interested in these topics, therefore let's elaborate on that and produce something a bit more robust specifically around that, which we can send back to them. So you're constantly getting kind of live data and insights on accounts, which you can use. So that's been really interesting. It's also really helped marketers to be able to identify opportunities. So one of my favorite examples, and it's not like a strictly account-based marketing example, but it would absolutely apply to account-based marketing as well, is where one of our clients, they produced this annual white paper that they would send out every year, and they would get thousands of people downloading this report because it was in PDF. And the challenge with that is they would provide all of these leads to their sales team, and the sales team would look at this list of 1,000, 2,000 leads, and they're just honestly don't really know where to start with this, don't know really how to prioritize this list. This is just a list of stuff, and so ultimately they just wouldn't follow up with it. And that's very disappointing from a marketer's perspective, because you spend so much time and money producing this and then you don't really show a return on it. So what they started to do was to be able to produce this in Turtl, be able to track all of the insights on the back end. And they're okay, there's some really interesting data we can get in here. And so they started to have more strategic conversations with their sales team, where they're so what territories are you having the most success selling X product to? And the sales guys would be well, we're really interested in selling to people based in Paris who are interested in, say, the North African energy market. And so the marketing team would say, okay, well, we know that there are 50 people who spent at least 5 minutes reading this report, reading specifically the chapter on the North African energy market. So maybe that's a good place for you guys to start prospecting. And the sales guys loved this, they were eating it up. And so they were then able to start having much more strategic conversations with these people who'd been reading their content. I mean, it's just so much better to do that than to just be given a list of 2,000 people and you don't really know where to start. So I think that's been really cool. And I could certainly see how that sort of insights would help salespeople in an account-based marketing scenario prioritize the people that potentially they may want to start to have those conversations with. So if you've produced a account-specific piece of content, they might be able to identify key people within that account that are most engaged, that maybe they want to start following up with first, and then they will have all this intel on the things they're interested in. So they're able to pick up the phone and talk to them about specifically those things. So, I mean, I think that's really, really exciting.
Yeah, it's almost like a type of intent data, really, isn't it? That you're actually seeing a level
Exactly.
of engagement and a level of intent that you can obviously then lead that prospect or even indeed that customer down a
Yeah.
conversation and
Yeah.
to introduce them to new solutions or to acquire them as a customer. So finally, Karla, are you working on anything there? Any innovations that are coming downstream that you can share with us? Anything new and exciting that we will be seeing in the coming weeks and months?
I mean, I think there's probably not going to be anything more exciting than the personalization stuff at this stage. That is really where we are focusing all of our energy right now. And we're still in the process of rolling that out to our customers and more broadly. And there are more things we will be doing around that to make it even more sophisticated. So, we talked about like the one-to-one and the one-to-few, but how can then this be applied to like the one-to-many scenario so that account-based marketers are able to deliver truly personalized content at scale? I mean, I think that is where it's going to get like mega exciting, because at the end of the day, the one-to-one and the one-to-few, it is possible to do that without our technology. It's just very, very time consuming and very expensive, but you can do it. But I think doing it at scale to lots and lots of people, that is something that is just not currently possible to do. And that's something that we are working on, and we will have something available. So yeah, that's, for me, that's obviously, I'm a bit biased because I am a marketer, but I think that is just so exciting to be able to get that scaled personalization.
Well, thank you, Karla. I look forward to seeing that coming on stream very soon. Karla, thank you for your time today, and lovely to learn a bit more about Turtl and how you're helping the ABM ecosystem. Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode of Let's Talk ABM, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted. Feel free to rate and review this podcast. Thanks so much for listening.